Well, it's something we all do every day, isn't it? Many times a day, even. We do it quite often without really putting much thought into it, which I suppose begs the question that if you're not really considering all the options, are you making a decision in reality? And I suppose for me the answer's yes, and for most other people too. Because if you're familiar with most of the usual outcomes, if it's a decision that you've made many times before, then I suppose you can do it without putting a lot of thought into it. What about something simple like, do you want a cup of tea? How often are we all asked that? And yet, how difficult a decision is that, really? When you ask somebody that question, the usual answer starts with something like, why? Why? What makes it such a major life decision? What difference is it actually going to make whether you have a cup of tea or not? And yet it becomes this huge question. And from my point of view, yes, I can answer that question because it's not simple. It leads on to a lot of other things. Do I want a cup of tea? Okay. Well, first of all, was the person who asked me just being polite, or are they going to make themselves a drink as well? Secondly, when did I last have a drink? Is it a hot day or a cold day? And that opens up a whole new can of worms, because if it's a hot day and I want a cold drink, I've not been offered one. So would it be rude if I said, well, no thanks, but I would like a glass of cordial? Or a better situation even than that, when you arrange to meet somebody at a cafe or a coffee shop, you know it's coming, you've probably not had much to drink before you go out, so you know you need something, and you meet them outside, you've had the journey there, and then you go in and spend an absolute age perusing the menu. Why? Because even after all that, when you've taken all that time, you order the same thing that you've always had. We build these things up in our heads, and that's just the small decisions. When it comes to the big ones, what's really strange is that we kind of look back when something's gone wrong specifically. We look back and go, oh, isn't it weird how just that one decision led to all this? But actually, every decision we make is a major decision. Everything that we do changes the direction of our life in some way. The cup of tea is tiny, but even so, it's like while I was making this, if I'd have had a cup of tea, that could have changed everything. I could have knocked it. It could have messed up a take. Lots of things could have gone wrong, which now haven't, and that could have changed the whole direction of how this comes out. And also when it comes to major decisions, when they go wrong, there's always someone who says, why did you do that? Like they know better. And what's kind of worse in a way is that a lot of the time we're tempted to say, oh, I don't know. But is that really true? Because if you're making a risky decision, especially if it's something new, then you're going to put a lot of thought into it. Because nobody bumbles through life not thinking about what they do. We might have done that when we were young, but that's just it. We learnt those lessons very quickly. And it's not because everything ended up in disaster when we didn't think about it. It's just that we learn that things turn out better more of the time when we do consider what we're doing. So as an adult, I think what would be a more honest answer when we get asked, why did you do that? Would be something along the lines of, well, I didn't think I'd get found out, or I thought I'd put enough thought into it that it wouldn't backfire. So maybe there's a bit of an issue deep down with everyone in taking responsibility. We're all happy enough to take responsibility for our successes, but we do tend to kind of back away from admitting when we've made a wrong decision. Why? Again, why do we do that? We're human, we make mistakes. we make wrong decisions. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. I tend to do that. My point is that every day, as I've said many times a day, we change our lives. And any one of the decisions that we make could have major ramifications. You might think, for example, that signing your divorce papers, whether or not to sign your divorce papers, is a major decision. But actually, is it any bigger decision than that oft-mentioned cup of tea? I mean, what if you decide to have a cup of tea, you go to turn the kettle on, and it shorts out and electrocutes you and knocks you unconscious? You hit your head as you're falling on the corner of a work unit, or you hit your head on the stone floor in my kitchen that has a stone floor. So then I fall down with all my weight, crack my skull, send a couple of fragments into my brain which could change my personality. It could end up in paralysis. That's a major, major decision, and it's not something that we usually think about. But I actually do. Do I put that much thought into every decision I make? Yes. Everything that I do is thought out to the nth degree. But don't think for even a moment that stops me having fun or taking risks or enjoying myself. It doesn't. It just means that I think about everything thoroughly, so I take fewer risks. But then again, I know that the ones that I do take, the risks I do take, are absolutely worth it. And I suppose it would be one thing if my incessant over-analysis of situations was confined to the world of beverages, but it's not. It's every aspect of my life, and especially the parts of my life that involve other people, social interactions. Conversations are difficult because subtext is a particular issue for me. I know that I miss it. I'm aware of that. And so if we have a conversation, for hours afterwards, I will go over it in my head, thinking of all the things that you might have meant by what you said, and whether I actually made the right responses during the time that we were having that conversation. So that happens to me all the time, and consequently, I tend to avoid conversations and social interaction because it's just easier. And no, that doesn't mean that I'm either lonely or alone. I'm not. I do have a group of friends who I know understand me, and we're very close and everything's fine. But I still overanalyze the things that happen there. It's just that they know I do that and they're comfortable with it. But that whole social interaction thing actually brings me on to what was supposed to be the point of what's turned into a little rant. I'm at university, and at the moment I'm studying a module called Attic to Audience, and I'm quite comfortable with most of that environment. I'm certainly happy in an attic, sat on my own, or maybe with somebody else that I feel comfortable with and I'm emotionally close to, but I'm also equally happy, strange as it might seem, in front of an audience, which, given what I've just said, I know sounds odd. Being in front of a room of hundreds or maybe thousands of people, all of whose attention is firmly pointed in my direction. But actually, there is no equal social interaction in that situation. It's a predefined transaction. You're in the audience, you expect to be entertained. I can entertain you, I can do that. I did it for years, and I was very happy doing it too, because there were no wild cards in that situation. Every aspect of the show was worked out beforehand, and I knew exactly what I was doing. But there were, of course, odd moments, and that's where things got kind of weird. because there were odd moments of ad-libbing where I might react to something someone in the audience had said, or if something unexpected happened on the stage. And that was a kind of out-of-body experience for me. It was really strange. It was almost like a kind of schizophrenia, because I would come up with something quickly in reaction to that. And at the time that that happened, it was almost like I was also a member of the audience, looking at myself, listening to what I was saying, and I would kind of think, well, I wish I could have come up with that. That was really good. It was very, very strange. And the whole thing was a kind of out-of-body experience on the whole. Very often after a show, I'd be unable to remember what had happened on the stage, the details of it. I knew what songs I'd been playing because I knew the set list and I knew the basics of what was going on, but details just eluded me. It was a really odd experience, but I was very, very happy in that environment, on a stage, entertaining people. Now, if I then met members of the audience outside in a random situation, that's a different story. One of my favourite jobs over my career as an entertainer was when I was working as a radio presenter. I mean, I essentially was in an attic on my own, talking to myself, unless it was an interview situation. But in that case, again, everything was still predefined. The interviewee would have received a list of questions that I was going to ask them, and they would have already thought about their answers. So everything was controlled. It's this controlled environment thing that I like. And strangely, as a performer, you actually have a lot of control over your environment as long as you put enough planning into it beforehand. The live shows were completely organised in minute detail. The radio was completely organised in minute detail because even more than gigs, it had to be. We had to work to the second. There were certain things that had to be played into each hour, whether it were adverts. Of course, we had to finish ready for the news at the top of the hour because that didn't actually come from the studio that I was in. We linked into a central news broadcast, so they were going bang on, whether we were early, late, or whatever. So everything was absolutely timed and controlled. But even beyond that, that whole thing is a process of recreation. Like I said, it goes into the planning beforehand, and it's that planning that for me is actually the creative process. And that's a weird process for me as well, because whether I'm writing a story or a script, a piece of prose, whether I'm writing a poem or a piece of music, in the first instance, it almost feels like I have very little to do with it consciously. The words or the music just flow down onto the page, and that's kind of out of my control in a weird way. But it's after that, that's when the main part of the creative process starts for me, when I start to craft each piece of work, when I start to polish it and make it the best thing that I can possibly make it. And that process can take days or sometimes weeks, but that's where I feel I'm being creative, and that's the time I think where I get the most enjoyment out of it personally as well. And I kind of take some solace in talking to other creative people on that point of view. I've got a friend who's a scriptwriter, and she's said to me that when she's writing, she'll get to a point where it's like she's sat in the audience watching a play and she just writes down what she's seeing. Or you know, the character will take shape, and then they get to a stage where they're almost writing their own dialogue. She can hear them talking and she just writes down what she's hearing. So it seems that I'm not the only one that goes through the creative process in that way. That makes me feel a bit better for a start. But, I mean, I've been talking about this now for too long, I'm sure. But it's given you a glimpse into the world of what it's like to be creative and autistic. And it's a strange place to live, sometimes a little bit unnerving, but I wouldn't change it for the world.
Well, now you tell me times are changing, but you're not a changed man. When she listens while you explain, she'll never understand you. So now you live your life the way that you think she wants you to. But whichever way it goes, one day you're gonna wind up singing the blues. Now you're wasting your time, towing the line. Wasting your time, towing the line. Giving yourself away just to make